people do sometimes ask, how are we going to pay off all this debt that the government is racking up as part of its responses to COVID? There's a few things you can say in response to that. The first is that there's actually no principle of economics or public finance which says that the optimal level of debt for a government is zero. And households usually want to pay off all their debts because people don't like to leave debts to their children, which is, of course, what will happen if you die without having paid your mortgage off. Most people like to leave assets to their children rather than debts. But governments, unlike the rest of us, don't actually die. I mean, nor do businesses. I mean, there's no rule of corporate finance that says the optimal level of debt for a business, whether it's BHP or a corner store, is necessarily zero either. But particularly in the case of governments, there is absolutely no compelling reason for them to pay off their debts by some arbitrarily determined date in the future. On the contrary, when government spending produces benefits for future generations of taxpayers as well as the present one, which well-chosen infrastructure spending will do, and which investments in public hospitals or in schools and universities ought to do as well, then intergenerational equity considerations suggest that paying for some of that spending through debt which future generations of taxpayers who will benefit from that spending will have to service is both fair and reasonable. In other words, when thinking about whether debt needs to be paid off or not, it's important to evaluate it in the context of what the debt has actually been used for, what the money that's been borrowed has been spent on. The second point I'd make is that when we look at history, very few governments have ever completely paid off their national debt. And for example, if you look at these charts here, you'll see that the British government, or the United Kingdom government as it's been since 1801, has always had some public debt going at least back to the late 1690s when the Bank of England was founded.